evening. You're watching WION with me, Sana Khan. The race for France's top job has come down to a head-to-head competition between Marine Le Pen, a far-right populist, and Emmanuel Macron, an arch-centrist defined by his pro-EU and pro-immigrant stances. Neither of them represent the two parties, the centre-left socialists and the centre-right Republicans, that have traditionally dominated French politics. French polls, which are highly accurate in the first round of the election, have Macron winning by roughly 20 points. That's a far, far higher margin than what you saw before the surprise Brexit and Trump victories. Even if Le Pen overperforms significantly, she would still have to climb a daunting hill to make up for the difference. But even a 20-point lead isn't a guarantee, and that's what makes Sunday's election that much more interesting. And then there was a hacking scandal as well. Here's what happened in the last few hours. Well, the campaign team of French presidential candidate Emmanuel Macron on Friday confirmed that it has suffered a coordinated hacking attack. A large trove of emails from Macron's campaign was posted online on Friday, and his party issued a statement saying that the leaked files were obtained by hacking the personal and professional mailboxes of several of the party officials. The statement also said that it's an attempt at democratic destabilization. In fact, to quote that statement exactly, it said, "The seriousness of this event is certain, and we shall not tolerate that the vital interests of democracy be put at risk," unquote. Macron's election campaign had complained in the past about attempts to hack its database. They have blamed Russia for the hacks as well. On the 26th of April, his campaign had said it had been a target of repeated hacks since January. However, Moscow has denied all these allegations. The online leak shortly before midnight on Friday came barely 24 hours before Sunday's final round of the presidential election, in which Macron faces Le Pen. It's a direct fight. In fact, let me get in François Gauthier. He joins us live from Puducherry. He's a French political writer and journalist. Thanks so much, Mr. Gauthier, for joining us here on WION. Now, we are talking about this big hacking scandal. What do you make of it? What could be the implications? Or is it coming far too late in the election, unlike what we saw in the US presidential election? It was a different, and the timing was very different as well.
Well, I think whoever did that is going to be counterproductive, because Mr. Macron is going to get more sympathy from the voters. You know, he's been hacked, he's a victim, whereas Mrs. Le Pen will be seen as someone who's been propped up either by the Russians or maybe why not by the Americans. You know, Mr. Trump would like Mrs. Le Pen to win, so why couldn't the Americans also hack Emmanuel Macron's emails and confidential files? So I think Mr. Macron was slated to win. He's even probably going to get a bigger margin of victory.
Oh, so you're saying even coming at the very last moment, this could have an impact and perhaps get more votes for Emmanuel Macron, sympathy votes. You know, there have been other stories. A fake story was also doing rounds a couple of days ago, alleging Macron had a secret offshore bank account. You think that those kind of stories, coupled with this hacking scandal, is actually going to benefit Macron and, widen the lead that he has over Le Pen further?
Yes, definitely, because nobody took seriously this rumor. You know, Macron himself said that there were right info and some false info which were, inserted. So nobody really believed, I think, the rumor that he has an offshore account. So he's going to get more of a vote, more sympathy. You know, he's a victim there.
Okay, Mr. Gauthier, do stick on with us. Let's quickly take a look at what's the common sentiment in France on the eve of the French election. Here are some of the reactions.
Ça ne m'étonne pas, on va dire. On sait qu'il y a des puissances étrangères qui veulent jouer un rôle dans l'élection présidentielle. Voilà, comme par hasard, juste à la fin, juste avant le vote.
Je pense qu'il y a toujours eu des coups bas entre hommes politiques. Avant, il y avait d'autres pratiques, et maintenant, dans le monde moderne, on a l'informatique, tout simplement, quoi.
Ben, en fait, si c'était pas quelque chose de classique, ce serait plus inquiétant que d'habitude, mais comme c'est relativement inquiétant globalement. Donc Emmanuel Macron, il y en a eu d'autres avant lui, malheureusement.
All right, Mr. Gauthier, you know, looking at what people in Paris are saying all over France, do you think this is a very crucial election in terms of historic in many ways? Is this election some sort, in many ways, become a referendum on France's identity? Do you think like that?
Well, I think the French ultimately, as it happened with the father of Marine Le Pen, who had also won in the first round, and the second round was against Jacques Chirac. The entire France voted for Le Pen. Le Pen was, you know, he got barely 20%, you know, he was totally raised out. And Mr. Chirac won handsomely. So I think the same thing is going to happen, maybe with less of a margin, because whatever, you know, whatever the good points of Mrs. Le Pen, people are scared of her, you know, of her Islamophobia, of your anti-Jewish attitude, especially. You know, she said something which is very responsible, that the French are not responsible for the gassing of the Jews, the French Jews during the Second World War, whereas everybody knows that they were denounced by French people, that the French police arrested them, you know, that they knew that they were going to concentration camps. So I think she's going to lose, and this hacking is not going to help her at all. Whoever did the hacking, whether it's the Russians or whether it's the Americans, whether it's whoever, you know, it's not going to help her at all. And on the contrary, Mr. Emmanuel Macron is going to get more votes.
Okay.
That's my feeling, at least.
Okay, Mr. Gauthier, do stay on with us. We're going to play out a short report for our viewers here. The French presidential election that is generally held between the Republicans and the Socialists has taken an interesting turn this year. The two leads competing in round 2 on May 7th are not from any of these parties. Emmanuel Macron, with 24% vote in round 1, is an independent from the En Marche movement, and Marine Le Pen, with 21% vote, is from the far-right party, the National Front. These two candidates are offering two very different platters to the citizens of France. Here's more.
Macron promises a stronger position of France in Europe and a globalized economy. Le Pen promises leaving the EU and returning to nation-state model. Macron plans to make budget savings of 60 billion euros so that France sticks to the EU deficit limit of 3% of GDP. Le Pen, on the other side, offers to turn the euro into a common currency used for trade but restore the franc in the domestic economy. Macron plans to boost people's purchasing power by cutting their social security contribution, worth about €500 annually for someone on a monthly net salary of €2,200. Le Pen plans to impose a new tax on the hiring of foreign workers so that French citizens get priority. Macron plans to reform the EU by giving the Eurozone a separate budget, finance minister and parliament, whereas Le Pen is ready to negotiate with the EU to repatriate powers to France and reform the bloc, then hold an in-and-out referendum on France's EU membership. On defence front, Macron plans to create an EU defence fund to promote joint military projects and set up a permanent European headquarters, whereas Le Pen is ready to boost armed forces by 50,000 personnel to return to 2007 levels and pull France out of NATO's command structure. France has moved out of its years-old tradition of choosing centre-left or centre-right. And now it is time to choose between globalization and nationalization. In a few hours, the world will know what it is that the citizens of France value more. Bureau Report, WION.
Mr. Gauthier, now this is something which you might not agree, but for the sake of analogy and simplification, many have compared these two candidates with the elections in the US. They've compared the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen to Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron to Hillary Clinton. Would you say it's a comparison at all?
No, I don't think so. I think economically, Mr. Macron and Mrs. Le Pen are not much different. You know, there are realities in France. You know, France is a country where, you know, from birth till death, you are taken care of by the state, and that nobody is going to be able to change much to that because it's a very fabric of France, and whoever does that will lose the next election. Where they differ, I think, it is about Europe. I mean, Mr. Macron is for Europe, and Mrs. Le Pen is against Europe. This is a very vital difference between them, and I think it's going to influence the vote. Also about the refugees, of course, Mrs. Le Pen, wants to close the borders, but I think Mr. Macron, when it will come to refugees, will toe a similar line. I mean, there's nothing much the French have to. They have too many refugees. They have too much problem with their Muslim minority. So they need to clamp down a little bit. So Mr. Macron will also clamp down. So they're not much different again. But Europe is very important. As a Frenchman, though I'm a Frenchman, I believe that Europe is important. It's necessary. Whatever the hurdles, whatever the problems, and of course there are going to be more problems. Europe needs to come. Europe needs to be to happen because there needs to be a counterweight to the United States and Russia also. Let's face it, Russia and the US, are two giants, and they battle it, either directly or through different countries. And again, we see how much, the US or the Russians are interfering in the French elections, wanting to, influence the result. France is the French they have a strong mind of their own. So whoever gets elected, will have a strong mind for the French. Will mind, the business of the French. Will have the interest of the French at heart. I think the French are going to vote for Mr. Macron because he's seen as more moderate, more pro-Europe, less anti-refugees. But he'll have the same economic policy as Mrs. Le Pen, more or less.
Okay, so not much of a difference in many respects, is that what you're saying? But, would you also concede that Emmanuel Macron, the way he's played out his candidature in these elections is something which is earning him this kind of lead that we're looking at? For example, launching en marche, distancing himself from, Hollande. Do you think this is something which is actually working for him, bringing out this non-political sort of fresh perspective into the election?
Yes, working against him that many of the young assistant who works with me, and she's like 25 years old, and she sees Mr. Macron as propped up by the banks, by the finance business. So that image is playing against him. But he, as you said, he's distanced himself from this establishment. He's even taken a distance from the left because he's a socialist. He was, the finance minister of Mr. Hollande, who's still the prime minister today. So he's taken a distance, But let us see when he gets elected, what's he going to do? Because there is no doubt that he's a finance man. There's no doubt that he's, close to the banks. So we need to see what he does. The same thing as Mr. Modi in India. What he said during the campaign and what he did when he became prime minister is quite different. Don't you agree with me?
Yes, I think I'll have to agree with that. But Mr. Gauthier, a couple of more questions for you. It's important for us sitting in India to look at how this French election, whoever takes over as the new leader, how is that going to impact the relations between India and France? Let's quickly take a look at this report and we'll come right back.
India and France launched a strategic partnership in 1998. Both countries cooperate in key areas like defense, security and energy. Here are 4 focal points of this partnership. In 2010 came a historic bilateral civil nuclear agreement between the two countries. As a result of this agreement, the nuclear power plant project in Jaipur now includes 6 pressurized European reactors with a total capacity of 9,900 megawatts. France's defense industry actively contributes to the Make in India program. Transfer of French technology enabled India to start building the Scorpene, its first conventional submarine. Sea trials began in 2015. India also concluded an agreement for the direct purchase of 36 Dassault Rafale fighter jets from France in September last year. France and India celebrated 50 years of space cooperation in 2014. The two countries cooperate over outer space for peaceful purposes and the development of telecom satellites. France and India are also working together to land a rover on Moon's surface by 2018. In the field of higher education, there are approximately 4,000 Indian students in France. France's target is to reach the 10,000 mark by 2020. Apart from an attractive visa policy, France carries out a twofold endeavour: support for scholarship programs and to Indian and French institutions for developing inter-university partnerships. From erstwhile colonial masters to an equal partner, relations between France and India have come a long way. Bureau Report, WION.
Mr. Gauthier, the relationship between India and France indeed has come a long way, but how will it go forward from here, provided any of these two wins the election? Will that depend largely on who that person will be, or is the policy largely, fixed and defined as far as ties between the two countries go?
See, two things. First, I'm a Frenchman who loves India. I'm married to an Indian. I live in India. As a Frenchman, I'm always disappointed at the way France invests in India. They invest still 10 times more in China than they do in India. They don't look at India as a geostrategic partner, as a political partner, whereas the Americans do a little bit now because of China. The thing that's very interesting is that Mr. Macron met the Dalai Lama when he came to France. Not many newspapers reported that, but I know because I have been in touch with the Dalai Lama.
Right.
And I know that Mr. Macron met the Dalai Lama, and not many French politicians met the Dalai Lama because the Chinese don't see it, they see red when it happens.
That's right.
He officially met him. Now, it could mean a lot for India because there's a confrontation which is, in the past, between China and India, Arunachal Pradesh, Akshay Sin. But there's also now the Spratly Islands, the way China is trying to control the, the flow of ships, between the China Sea and the Indian Ocean. So the fact that Mr. Macron met the Dalai Lama, if he does become president, and if he does follow a more pro-Tibetan policy, for India, it will be very beneficial, I think, because India needs, support, whether it is, versus China, whether even Kashmir, or whether it is, China, which has surrounded India from all sides, from Nepal to Pakistan to Sri Lanka. So India needs support, and I do hope, as a Frenchman who loves India, that Mr. Macron, when he becomes president, will give more support to India, even if it is indirectly by supporting.
And if Marine Le Pen was to win the election, is that something that you see that she can bring to the table?
I think she's very ignorant about India. I think in terms of foreign policy, she's less, worldly than Mr. Macron. She has idea about France, about refugees, about, but I don't think she has many ideas about, India. I doubt she knows much about India. In fact, she never mentioned it. I never heard her speaking about India.
All right, so it's advantage Macron for India in case he wins the election. I'm going to take a concluding question from you, Mr. Gauthier, but it's important for our viewers to also understand how France votes, because this is the second round, so it's imperative for us to take a look at the election process that France follows. Here's a quick roundup of that. The French presidential elections are conducted in two stages. Round 1 of stage 1 is open to any candidate who is able to get 500 signatures of support from elected officials such as mayors. This time, 11 candidates competed in the first round. Theoretically, if a candidate gets more than 50% votes in the first round, he or she is considered the winner. But this has never happened. When no candidate gets more than 50%, round 2 comes into action. 2 weeks post round 1, the country votes to select its president. This year, 2 leading candidates of round 1 are Emmanuel Macron with 24% vote and Marine Le Pen with 21% votes. On 7th of May, the country will choose between one of these 2 leading candidates, and France will have its new president. But there's one condition. The president's power and position are highly dependent on the National Assembly. The elections for the National Assembly are due in June, and each of the 577 constituencies of France will vote for their deputy. This is stage 2. To win in the first round, a candidate must gain more than 50% of the vote and have a number of votes that are equal to at least 1/4 of all registered voters in the electorate. If no candidate meets both these requirements in the first round, all candidates who got above 12.5% of the vote go into round 2. Whichever candidate has greater number of votes in the second round wins, regardless of whether they reach the 50% mark. Once the assembly is selected, the president appoints a prime minister who will form a government with a majority in the National Assembly. If the party commanding the assembly is not in sync with the elected president, either the president's power becomes ceremonial or the party pushes back and removes the prime minister and ministers appointed by him. And if all goes well, the elected president runs the country for the next 5 years. Bureau Report, WION. And of course, it's a maximum of 2 terms that an elected president can hold. So that's a total time span of 10 years. Mr. Gauthier, very interesting the way France chooses its president. But, you know, at this point, I'd like to ask you your last comment. What do you think will be the priority for the winner of these elections in France? Will it be immigration? Will it be fighting terrorism? Or will it be economy or any other thing perhaps? What will be the priority?
I think economy, is what rules the world today. We look at countries not, because of the culture, because of their food, or even because of their politics, but we look at their economy. This is why China, has got so much attention in the world, because of its economy, because of the fact that they manufacture everything. So I think the first task of Mr. Macron will be to reduce employment. After all, he's a banker, he's a finance guy. So that's going to be his priority. I just wanted to say that, the French system is actually a good one. I wish India would borrow from it, that you have a president who has powers and a prime minister who also has powers. It's very rare that the prime minister and the president from 2 different parties. It happened with Mr. Chirac and Mitterrand. But it did okay. It went on. They had their problem, but it went on. It's a good system. I wish India would adopt it. That do away with this president who has no powers and costs so much to the exchequer. And the prime minister who's got all the powers. So it's a good system, and I think it's going to work again this time. And the French vote like the Indians. They kick out those who don't perform. They just kick them out. They feel that Mr. Hollande didn't perform. He had such a low rating. His popularity is very low. I feel he was an okay guy, he was very dignified when the Charlie Hebdo attacks, But anyway, the French have rejected him. They're going to vote for another person. It's going to be Mr. Macron, most probably. And it's a good system, and it works well.
All right. I mean, let's hope your suggestion is taken perhaps sometime, because one will have to make certain heavyweight changes to the Indian constitution to get that 2-tier system to India. But Mr. Gauthier, appreciate you joining us here and sharing your thoughts. Tomorrow, Sunday, is the big day. All eyes on what's going to happen. Thanks so much for joining us there.